Blood-soaked tears fell from Morning Sky's eyes as she buried the last of her family beneath the unforgiving earth of the Texas plains. The year was 1875, and at 22 years old, she was utterly alone in a world that had no place for a Comanche woman without a tribe. Her husband had been killed 6 moons ago in a raid against white settlers, and now disease had claimed her aging father-in-law, her last connection to the people who had once been her world. Morning Sky wore a tattered dress given to her by a missionary who had tried to convert her family before they fled deeper into the territory. The fabric scratched against her skin as she patted down the soil over the fresh grave. Her long black hair, once adorned with beads and feathers of pride, hung loose and unkempt around her face. The wind whistled through the mesquite trees, carrying away her soft prayers to the ancestors. She had been Morning Sky to her people, but the white settlers who occasionally glimpsed her called her something else, that wild Indian woman with fear and contempt in their voices. Her Comanche name felt hollow now, with no one left to speak it with reverence. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, Morning Sky knew she couldn't stay. The U.S. cavalry had been pushing all remaining Comanche onto reservations. Without the protection of her tribe, she would either be forced onto the barren land set aside for her people or killed for resisting. Neither option appealed to her. Miles away, in the small but growing settlement of Ordway, Colorado, Matthew Hayes dismounted from his dappled gray stallion, dust coating his worn leather boots. At 30 years old, he had spent more than a decade driving cattle across the frontier, building a modest ranch outside of town. His calloused hands spoke of hard work, and the lines around his blue eyes told of squinting into the harsh sun day after day. "Looks like another dry month ahead," the livery owner commented as Matthew handed over the reins. "Been saying prayers for rain every night, Frank," Matthew replied, adjusting his weathered Stetson. "Cattle are getting restless. Might have to drive them north earlier than planned." Frank nodded sympathetically. "Heard there's trouble brewing with those last Comanche bands." "Army's getting impatient." Matthew's jaw tightened. Unlike many of the settlers who had moved west, he harbored no hatred for the native peoples. He had traded fairly with them in his younger days, and had even learned a smattering of their language during a particularly harsh winter when a Comanche band had sheltered him after he'd been separated from his trail companions. "Folks just trying to hold onto their way of life," Matthew said quietly. "Can't fault them for that." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Maybe not, but you'd best keep those thoughts to yourself around town. Marshal Becker still has a bounty out for Comanche scalps." Matthew nodded grimly. "I'll keep that in mind." 2 weeks later, Morning Sky crouched by a small creek, refilling her water skin. She had been traveling north, avoiding settlements and army patrols. Her supplies were dwindling and hunger had become a constant companion. The last of her pemmican had been consumed 3 days ago, and she had been unsuccessful in her attempts to hunt with the small knife that was her only weapon. She heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats and quickly ducked behind a stand of cottonwoods. Through the branches, she saw a lone rider on a dappled gray horse moving at an unhurried pace. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a beard that caught the sunlight in shades of brown and gold. A cowboy, by the look of his attire. Morning Sky remained perfectly still, barely breathing. The man dismounted, leading his horse to the creek to drink. As the horse bent its head to the water, the cowboy stretched his back and looked around appreciatively at the landscape. His eyes, blue as the summer sky, seemed kind even from a distance. When he turned, Morning Sky inadvertently stepped on a dry branch, the sharp crack shattering the peaceful afternoon. The man's hand immediately went to the pistol on his hip, his body tensing. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice steady. "Show yourself. I mean no harm if you don't." Morning Sky considered her options. She could attempt to flee, but she was weak from hunger and knew she wouldn't get far. With resignation, she stepped out from behind the trees, her head held high despite her fear. Matthew Hayes blinked in surprise at the woman who emerged from the cottonwood stand. Her proud bearing contrasted with her haggard appearance. Her clothes were worn and dirty, her face gaunt with hunger. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, dark, intelligent, and filled with a weariness that spoke of profound loss. He recognized her as Comanche immediately, from the high cheekbones and the way she wore her hair. His hand moved away from his pistol, and he raised both palms in a gesture of peace. "Ha," he said, using one of the few Comanche greetings he remembered. "I am Matthew." Surprise flickered across Morning Sky's face at hearing the familiar word from a white man's lips. She did not respond immediately, assessing him carefully. "You speak the tongue of my people," she finally said in halting English, words she had learned from missionaries and traders over the years. Matthew shook his head. "Only a few words. I spent some time with Comanche years back." He gestured to the creek. "Are you thirsty? Hungry?" Morning Sky hesitated, pride warring with necessity. Finally, she gave a single nod. Matthew reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a package wrapped in cloth. "Jerky and cornbread," he explained, offering it to her. "I've got coffee too, if you'd like some." Morning Sky approached cautiously, keeping a safe distance as she accepted the food. She sniffed it suspiciously before taking a small bite. As the flavor hit her tongue, she couldn't help but eat more quickly, her hunger overriding her caution. Matthew busied himself with making a small fire, giving her space to eat. "Where's your people?" he asked after a while, his tone careful. Morning Sky stiffened, swallowing the last of the cornbread. "Gone," she said simply. "My husband in battle, others to sickness. No tribe now." Matthew nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of her words. A Comanche without a tribe was like a wolf without a pack, vulnerable and alone in a hostile world. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "Where are you headed?" Morning Sky shrugged, her face betraying nothing. "Away from soldiers." "From reservation." "That's a hard road alone," Matthew commented, pouring coffee into a tin cup and offering it to her. She took it, warming her hands around the metal. "No other road for me." As they sat in silence by the small fire, the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Matthew considered his options. Leaving her here alone didn't sit right with him, but he wasn't sure what help he could offer that she would accept. "My ranch is about a day's ride north," he said finally. "You could come along, just until you get your strength back. I've got a cabin where you could stay. It's private, away from the main house." Morning Sky's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you help Comanche woman?" Matthew considered his answer carefully. "I judge people by their actions, not their birth. You've done me no harm, and—" He hesitated, then continued honestly, "I know what it's like to be alone." Morning Sky studied him, trying to detect any deceit in his words or manner. She had heard stories of white men who offered sanctuary only to betray native women to the army, or worse. But there was something in this man's blue eyes that spoke of honor, and the gnawing emptiness in her stomach reminded her that she had few options. "One night," she said finally. "Then I go." Matthew nodded, not pushing further. "One night with food and rest. After that, your choice." They traveled north the next morning, Matthew on his horse and Morning Sky walking alongside. After a few miles, seeing her fatigue despite her determined stride, he offered her the reins. "Horse can carry too," he said. "You're about to collapse." Pride kept her walking for another mile before she wordlessly accepted his outstretched hand and swung up behind him on the horse. She sat stiffly, maintaining as much distance as the saddle allowed, her hands resting lightly on the edge of his belt. As they rode, Matthew pointed out landmarks and spoke of his ranch. Born in Missouri, he had come west after the war, working as a cowhand until he saved enough to purchase his own land. It wasn't much, he explained, 100 acres with a small herd of cattle, a modest main house, and a separate cabin that had been the original homesteader's dwelling. Why no wife? Morning Sky asked suddenly, breaking a long silence. Man with land should have family. Matthew's shoulders stiffened slightly beneath his worn jacket. Had someone once. She didn't take to frontier life. Went back east 5 years ago. Morning Sky nodded, understanding more than he said. The life of a rancher's wife was hard, filled with isolation and endless work. Many white women who came west with romantic notions quickly soured on the reality. You have no people also, she observed. Parents died in the war. Brother too, Matthew replied. Got some hands that work the ranch, and folks I'm friendly with in town, but no family to speak of. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise, and Matthew's ranch came into view below them. It was modest compared to some of the sprawling operations further east, but Morning Sky could see it was well maintained. A 2-story clapboard house stood near a barn and corral, with a smaller cabin about 100 yards away, near a stand of pines. That's the old cabin there, Matthew pointed. It's simple, but it's got a good stove and a bed. No one will bother you there. As they approached, 2 men emerged from the barn, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons when they spotted Morning Sky. It's all right, Matthew called out. She's a guest. The older of the 2 men, his weathered face a map of hard years, frowned deeply. A Comanche boss. Here, you know what folks in town will say. I know what they'd say if I left a starving woman alone in the wilderness too, Tom, Matthew replied evenly. And I know which opinion I care about more. Tom shook his head but didn't argue further. The younger ranch hand, a boy hardly past 17, stared at Morning Sky with undisguised curiosity. Get back to work, Charlie. Tom barked at the boy, who jumped and hurried back into the barn. Matthew dismounted and helped Morning Sky down, though she needed little assistance. Tom, can you see that some food is taken to the old cabin, and some clean water for washing? Tom nodded curtly. Your ranch, your business. He turned and walked away, his disapproval evident in every step. Don't mind him, Matthew said quietly. He lost family in raids years back, not Comanche, but he doesn't much distinguish between tribes. I understand, Morning Sky replied. My people lost many to bluecoats and settlers. Heart grows hard when filled with ghosts. Matthew showed her to the cabin, which was indeed simple but clean and sturdy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small iron stove beside it. A narrow bed with a straw mattress stood in the corner, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the single room. It's not much, he said apologetically. It is much, Morning Sky contradicted him. I have slept under stars for many moons, this is. She searched for the English word, luxury. Matthew smiled, the expression transforming his solemn face. I'll have food sent over. There's a creek about 50 paces behind for washing, though it's cold this time of year. I'll come check on you in the morning. After he left, Morning Sky explored the cabin, running her hands over the unfamiliar objects. A shelf held a few books, their spines cracked from use. She opened one, staring at the mysterious markings that white people used to trap words on paper. Later, a knock at the door announced the arrival of food, a pot of stew, fresh bread, and a jar of preserved peaches. It was Charlie who brought it, his eyes wide as she opened the door. "Mr. Hayes said to bring this," he said, holding out the basket. "Thank you," she replied, taking it from him. Charlie lingered, shifting from foot to foot. "Madam, I ain't never met a real Indian before. Is it true you can talk to animals and such?" Despite herself, Morning Sky felt a smile tug at her lips. "No more than you can, but we listen better, perhaps." Charlie grinned. "That's what I figured. Pa always said Indians was just people, no matter what the preachers claimed." His face sobered. "Sorry about your tribe, Mr. Hayes told us." "That's a hard thing." Morning Sky nodded, surprised by the genuine sympathy in the boy's voice. "Yes, hard thing." After Charlie left, she ate slowly, savoring each bite. The stew was rich with meat and vegetables, the bread still warm from the oven. As darkness fell, she built a fire in the fireplace and sat before it, staring into the flames as she had done countless nights before, but now with a roof over her head instead of stars. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to weep for all she had lost: her husband, standing bare, strong and proud; her father-in-law, lone wolf, keeper of the old stories; the children she had hoped to bear but never did; the tribe that had been her world. The tears came until she had no more, leaving her empty but somehow lighter, as if she had poured out some of her grief into the hungry flames. Morning came with a gentle rain pattering on the cabin roof. Morning Sky woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. She rose and washed in the basin of water left from the night before, then rebraided her hair, wishing for the combs and beads she had once possessed. A knock at the door announced Matthew, standing in the drizzle with another basket of food. "Thought you might be hungry," he said. "Rain's good for the land but makes for a dreary morning." "Thank you," she said, accepting the basket. "I will leave when rain stops." Matthew frowned slightly. "There's no hurry. You're welcome to stay longer. Get your strength back proper." Morning Sky shook her head. "Cannot stay. Your men not want Comanche here. Town people find out, make trouble." "Let me worry about that," Matthew replied. "Where will you go? The territories aren't safe for a lone woman, especially." "Especially Indian woman," she finished for him. "I know, but I cannot stay." Matthew removed his hat, running a hand through his sandy hair in frustration. "At least stay until the weather clears, maybe a few days more, please. I'd worry something fierce if you left now." Morning Sky studied him, puzzled by his concern. "Why you care what happens to Comanche woman?" Matthew met her gaze squarely. "Because I've seen too much death and suffering in this world to walk away when I can help." He paused. "What's your name?" "I never asked." "Morning Sky," she replied softly, the familiar sounds of her name in English feeling strange on her tongue. "Morning Sky," he repeated carefully. "It suits you." They stood in silence for a moment, the rain creating a gentle backdrop to their conversation. Finally, Morning Sky nodded once. "I stay until rain stops, then we talk again." The rain continued for 3 days, a blessing for the drought-stricken land, but keeping Morning Sky confined to the cabin. Charlie brought her meals and stayed to chat, his curiosity about her people seemingly bottomless. She found herself telling him stories her father-in-law had passed down, the sacred tales of the Comanche that explained the world and their place in it. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Matthew came to the cabin with a bundle of fabric. "Thought you might need some fresh clothes," he explained. "Had these put aside. They belong to—" "Well, they've been in a trunk for some time." Morning Sky accepted the bundle, realizing they were women's clothes, simple but well-made dresses, a shawl, and even undergarments. She looked at Matthew questioningly. "Your wife's?" she asked. Matthew nodded, a flash of old pain crossing his face. "Catherine's. She won't be back for them." Morning Sky ran her fingers over the fabric. "She must have been small woman like me." About your size, yes, Matthew agreed. Blonde hair, green eyes. Different as could be from you, but the clothes should fit. Thank you, Morning Sky said. This is much kindness. Matthew shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. It's nothing. They were just sitting there. He cleared his throat. Rain's supposed to let up tomorrow, I thought. If you're still planning to leave, I could ride with you a ways. Make sure you get somewhere safe. Morning Sky considered his offer. The practical part of her knew having a white man's escort would make her journey safer. Yet something held her back from accepting too readily. I think on it, she said finally. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the world washed clean by the rain. Morning Sky stood outside the cabin, wearing one of Catherine's dresses. It felt strange after so long in her tattered clothes, but the fabric was soft against her skin, and she had to admit it was a better disguise for traveling through white settlements. She watched as Matthew worked with his cattle in the distance, directing his men with easy authority. There was a grace to him despite his size, a gentleness in how he handled the animals. She had noticed it the first day, how different he was from the brutal soldiers and settlers she had encountered before. When he finished his morning tasks, Matthew rode over to the cabin, dismounting to speak with her. You look. He began, then seemed at a loss for words. Strange, Morning Sky supplied, glancing down at herself. I was going to say nice, Matthew corrected with a small smile. Have you decided? About leaving, Morning Sky looked out across the rolling plains, the vast emptiness that awaited her. Where would I go? She asked softly, more to herself than to him. You could stay, Matthew said, the words coming out in a rush. Not just for a few days, I mean. There's work here. The cabin's not being used. You'd have your privacy, earn your keep if that matters to you. Morning Sky turned to him, surprised. You would hire a Comanche woman to do what? Well, Matthew considered, you know plants, I'd wager, which are good for medicine and such. Charlie said you've been telling him about different herbs. We lose cattle sometimes because we don't know how to treat them properly. And he hesitated. I've seen your mending. The way you fixed that tear in your old dress. We could use someone with skilled hands around here. Morning Sky was silent, weighing his offer. It was more than generous, it was unprecedented. White ranchers did not hire Comanche women. Your men would not like, she pointed out. Town people talk. Tom will come around, Matthew said confidently. Charlie already adores you. As for the town. He shrugged. I've never much cared what they think. My land, my business. Morning Sky thought of the emptiness that stretched before her if she left, the loneliness, the danger. Here, at least, she had shelter and food. And something else she couldn't quite name, something in the way Matthew looked at her with respect rather than fear or disdain. I stay, she said finally, for now, until better path shows itself. Matthew's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Good, that's good. The following weeks established a new rhythm on the Hayes Ranch. Morning Sky kept to herself initially, focusing on making the cabin her own. She cleaned it thoroughly, arranged the simple furniture to better suit her needs, and began collecting herbs and plants from the surrounding areas, drying them in bunches from the ceiling beams. Charlie became a frequent visitor, eager to learn what she knew about the natural world. She taught him to identify plants that could heal wounds, reduce fever, or settle a troubled stomach. In return, he brought her news from the ranch and town, as well as occasional treats from the main house's kitchen. Tom remained distant, watching her with suspicious eyes whenever their paths crossed, but he made no overt moves against her. The other ranch hands followed his lead, giving her a wide berth when she ventured near the main house or barn. Matthew visited daily, usually in the evenings after his work was done. He would bring supplies she requested or books he thought might interest her. though she could not read them. Sometimes he would sit on the porch with her as twilight fell, teaching her the written words that matched the English she spoke haltingly. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Matthew brought a newspaper from town. "Thought you might want to practice your letters," he explained, sitting beside her on the porch steps. As they bent their heads over the pages, Morning Sky's finger traced an article that caught her eye. "What this say?" she asked, pointing to a headline. Matthew's expression darkened as he read it. "It's about the last Comanche bands being moved to the reservation in Indian Territory. Says the Army rounded up the final resistors last week." Morning Sky's hand trembled slightly. "All gone now, all Comanche." "According to this," Matthew confirmed gently. "I'm sorry, Morning Sky." She was silent for a long moment, staring at the incomprehensible words that declared the end of her people's freedom. "I am truly last one now," she whispered. "Last one free." Matthew hesitated, then placed his hand over hers, a gesture of comfort that surprised them both. "You're not entirely alone," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Morning Sky looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his blue eyes. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that transcended the vast differences in their backgrounds and experiences. She did not pull her hand away. As summer progressed into fall, Morning Sky's role on the ranch evolved. Word of her knowledge of medicinal plants spread, and soon she was treating not just the ranch's animals but occasionally the men as well. When Charlie developed a high fever that wouldn't break, it was Morning Sky's willow bark tea and skilled care that pulled him through. Even Tom grudgingly acknowledged her worth after she saved a prized heifer and her calf during a difficult birth. "Don't know what you did," he admitted gruffly, "but Jake Miller lost 3 cows the same way last spring. Guess there's something to your Indian medicine after all." Matthew watched her integration into ranch life with quiet satisfaction. There was a stillness about Morning Sky that he admired, a patient strength that reminded him of the land itself, enduring despite all hardships. She spoke more confidently in English now, though she retained an accent that he found oddly musical. They had fallen into a comfortable routine of sharing the evening meal together, sometimes at the main house but more often at her cabin, where she would cook traditional Comanche dishes adapted to the ingredients available. Matthew found himself looking forward to these quiet evenings, to the sound of her voice as she gradually shared more of her past with him. He learned of her childhood in a large band, of her marriage at 17 to Standing Bear, a respected warrior. She spoke of the growing encroachment of white settlers, of the painful decisions tribal leaders faced as their hunting grounds shrank, and the buffalo herds were decimated. She told him of the raid where Standing Bear had fallen, and of the sickness that had claimed the remaining members of her small family band. In return, Matthew shared his own history, his upbringing in Missouri, the devastating loss of his parents and brother in the war, his journey west to escape painful memories. He spoke of Catherine, too, the schoolteacher's daughter who had agreed to marry him with stars in her eyes, only to discover that the frontier reality fell far short of the romantic novels she adored. She was not wrong to leave, he admitted one evening, poking at the fire in Morning Sky's cabin. "I couldn't give her the life she wanted." "And what life was that?" Morning Sky asked, setting aside the shirt of his she was mending. "Theaters and dinner parties, fine dresses and society friends." Matthew shrugged. "Things that matter in Philadelphia but not much out here." "You loved her very much?" Morning Sky's question was soft, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. Matthew considered this. "I thought I did. Now I think perhaps I loved the idea of her, this delicate, refined woman who represented everything civilized and gentle, everything I wasn't." He sighed. Took me a long time to realize that delicate things don't survive out here. You need to be strong to make a life in these lands. Morning Sky nodded, understanding in her eyes. Like prairie grass that bends but does not break in wind. Exactly like that, Matthew agreed, his gaze holding hers across the small space. Like you. A flush crept into Morning Sky's cheeks and she looked away, suddenly conscious of the intimacy of their conversation. It grows late, she said, rising from her chair. You have early work tomorrow. Matthew stood as well, aware that something had shifted between them yet again. That I do. He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. Good night, Morning Sky. Good night, Matthew, she replied, using his Christian name for the first time instead of the formal Mr. Hayes she had maintained until now. As autumn progressed, bringing cooler temperatures and golden light to the prairie, Matthew found himself increasingly drawn to Morning Sky's cabin in his free moments. There was a peace there he couldn't find elsewhere, a sense of rightness in her presence that both comforted and confused him. One crisp October morning, they rode out together to check on a distant part of the ranch where Matthew was considering expanding his grazing land. Morning Sky sat her borrowed horse with natural grace, having quickly relearned the riding skills of her youth. They crested a rise to find a breathtaking view spread before them, rolling plains stretching to distant purple mountains, the land painted in autumn hues of gold and russet. It is beautiful, Morning Sky said softly, reining her horse to a stop beside Matthew's. Like the lands where my people once hunted buffalo. Matthew watched her profile as she gazed across the vista, her face softened with memory. The sunlight caught the few strands of silver in her black hair, and something tightened in his chest at the sight. Morning Sky, he said, his voice suddenly serious. Are you happy here? She turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. Happy, this is not word I think of often, she considered for a moment. I am, content, safe, useful, she paused. These are not small things. No, Matthew agreed. They aren't small at all. He hesitated, then pushed ahead. I've been thinking about the future, about your place here. Morning Sky's face grew still, her eyes watchful. You want me to leave? No, Matthew exclaimed, startled by the suggestion. God, no, the opposite, in fact. He took a deep breath. I want to make your position here more permanent, official. I do not understand, Morning Sky said cautiously. Matthew dismounted, coming to stand beside her horse and looking up at her. I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife. Morning Sky's eyes widened, genuine shock replacing her usual composed expression. Your wife, a Comanche woman, Matthew nodded. I know it's unexpected, and I know there would be talk in town, but I've come to care for you, Morning Sky, more than I thought possible. Morning Sky slid from her horse to stand before him, searching his face intently. Marriage is a serious thing in my culture, not entered lightly, nor in mine, Matthew assured her. Why? She asked simply. Why would you want Comanche widow as wife? Matthew considered his answer carefully, knowing its importance. Because in you, I see strength and wisdom and grace. Because when I'm with you, I feel at peace in a way I never have before. Because I believe we could build something good together, not just a ranch, but a home. He paused. And because I think I'm falling in love with you. Morning Sky stood very still, absorbing his words. In her culture, marriages were often arranged for practical purposes, with love being a luxury that might or might not develop with time. Yet she could not deny the warmth that had grown in her heart for this quiet, honorable man who had offered her sanctuary when she had nothing. There would be great trouble, she warned, for both of us. I'm prepared for that, Matthew said steadily. Children of such union would belong to neither world fully, she continued, neither white nor Comanche. They would belong to us, Matthew countered, to a family that loved them. Morning Sky's heart quickened at the thought of children, something she had given up hope for after years of childless marriage to Standing Bear. "I need time," she said finally, "to think on this." Matthew nodded, disappointment flashing briefly in his eyes before he mastered it. "Of course. Take all the time you need." They rode back to the ranch in thoughtful silence, each contemplating the implications of what had just transpired between them. That evening, Morning Sky sat alone in her cabin, considering Matthew's proposal. Marriage to him would give her security, a permanent place in a world that had become increasingly hostile to her kind. But it would also mean a final severance from her past, an acknowledgement that the Comanche way of life she had known was truly gone forever. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Charlie standing there, shuffling his feet nervously. "Evening, Miss Morning Sky," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," she replied, gesturing him inside. "Something wrong at main house?" "No, madam, just—" Charlie hesitated. "Well, I heard Mr. Hayes asked you to marry him." Tom was grumbling about it, something fierce. Morning Sky sighed. "News traveled quickly on a small ranch. Mr. Hayes has asked. I have not yet answered." Charlie nodded, his young face earnest. "I just wanted to say, that is, if it matters what I think it would be a fine thing. Mr. Hayes, he's been different since you came, happier like, and you've been good for the ranch too." Morning Sky smiled gently at the boy's obvious sincerity. "Thank you, Charlie. Your words mean much to me." After Charlie left, Morning Sky walked outside, gazing up at the star-filled sky. In the Comanche tradition, important decisions were often made after seeking guidance from the spirits. She closed her eyes, letting the cool night air wash over her, opening her heart to the wisdom of the ancestors. As she stood there, memories flooded through her Standing Bear's face as he rode off for the last time, her father-in-law teaching her the healing ways of plants, the smoke from village fires rising into the sky, the laughter of children playing among the tippies. She honored these memories, holding them close, but newer images came as well. Matthew's smile as he listened to her stories, the quiet companionship of their evenings together, the respect in his eyes when she spoke, the gentle touch of his hand over hers that first night on the porch. Morning Sky opened her eyes, clarity washing over her like the starlight. The past was precious, but it could not be reclaimed. The future, however, stretched before her with unexpected possibility. The next morning, she walked to the main house earlier than usual. Matthew was on the porch, drinking coffee and reviewing his ledger books. He looked up as she approached, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "Good morning," he said, setting aside his work and standing. "I have an answer for you," Morning Sky said without preamble. Matthew nodded, his face serious. "I'm listening. In my tradition, when woman joins with man, she becomes part of his family, his people." Morning Sky held his gaze steadily. "I have no people left, no tribe. If I marry you, would you be my people now?" Matthew stepped closer, understanding the deeper question she was asking. "I would, and you would be mine. We would be family to each other." Morning Sky nodded, a decision crystallizing within her. "Then yes, Matthew Hayes, I will be your wife." The joy that spread across Matthew's face was like sunrise breaking over the plains. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his larger ones. "I promise you won't regret this. One condition," Morning Sky said, a hint of her old pride surfacing. "We marry in Comanche way as well as white man's church, so spirits of my ancestors may bless union." Matthew's smile widened. "I would be honored. Just tell me what to do." The news of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into town. Reactions were predictably mixed. Charlie was openly delighted. already referring to Morning Sky as Mrs. Hayes, despite Tom's scowls. The other ranch hands were confused but loyal enough to Matthew to keep their opinions to themselves. In Ordway, the response was decidedly more negative. The local preacher refused to perform the ceremony, citing biblical prohibitions against being unequally yoked with unbelievers. Several of Matthew's business associates stopped speaking to him altogether. Others, more pragmatic, adopted a wait-and-see attitude, unwilling to sever ties with one of the area's more successful ranchers regardless of his eccentric marital choices. Through it all, Matthew remained steadfast, his quiet determination a bulwark against the disapproval surrounding them. If anything, the opposition seemed to strengthen his resolve. "Never much cared for Reverend Simmons anyway," he commented dryly after being informed of the preacher's refusal. "Too fond of hellfire and not nearly fond enough of charity." He found a justice of the peace in the next county who was willing to perform a civil ceremony, and preparations began for a wedding that would combine elements of both their traditions. As the designated day approached, Morning Sky found herself experiencing a nervousness she hadn't anticipated. Marriage to Standing Bear had been arranged by their families, a practical alliance with little ceremony beyond the exchange of gifts and the construction of their tipi. This was different, a choice made from her heart, with a man from another world entirely. The night before the wedding, she sat with Matthew on the porch of what would soon be their shared home, as he had decided they would live in the main house together while keeping her cabin as a place for her to practice her healing work. "Are you certain of this?" she asked softly, watching his profile in the gathering darkness. "There is still time to change mind. No one would blame you." Matthew turned to her, his expression serious in the fading light. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He reached for her hand. "Are you having doubts?" Morning Sky shook her head. "Not doubts, just wonder at strange path Creator has set before me." "Life has a way of surprising us," Matthew agreed. "A year ago, I never could have imagined sitting here with you like this. Now I can't imagine my life any other way." Morning Sky smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed her solemn face. "Nor can I." Matthew leaned closer, hesitating just a moment before pressing his lips gently to hers, their first kiss, sweet and tentative, a promise of things to come. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, a perfect late October morning. By agreement, they would begin with the Comanche ceremony at sunrise, followed by the civil ceremony later in the day. Morning Sky had prepared for weeks, gathering the necessary items and instructing Matthew in the ritual words and actions. She had made a special dress from soft buckskin acquired from a trader, decorated with simple beadwork in the Comanche style. Her hair was adorned with a single eagle feather, a treasured possession from her father-in-law. Matthew wore his best clothes but had added a beaded band around his hat, made by Morning Sky to symbolize his acceptance into the Comanche way. They met at a small clearing near the creek, where Morning Sky had built a sacred fire the night before and kept it burning through the darkness. Charlie was their only witness from the ranch, having begged to be included. He watched with wide-eyed fascination as Morning Sky instructed Matthew to stand across the fire from her. "Fire is life," she explained, her voice taking on a formal cadence as she spoke in both Comanche and English, translating for Matthew's benefit. "It cleanses and purifies. We stand on either side, two separate people. When we join hands across fire, we become one, joined by sacred flame." Matthew reached across the small fire, taking her outstretched hands in his. The warmth between them was more than just the heat of the flames. Morning Sky continued, "I, who was born to Comanche people, take you, Matthew Hayes, as my husband. I bring to you my strength, my wisdom, my healing hands. I will walk beside you all days of my life." Matthew repeated the words she had taught him, his voice steady and clear in the morning air. "I, Matthew Hayes, take you, morning sky, as my wife. I bring to you my protection, my respect, my faithful heart. I will walk beside you all days of my life." Together they circled the fire, moving sunwise, completing the bond. Morning Sky then presented Matthew with a small medicine pouch to wear around his neck, containing sacred herbs and a small stone from her homeland. "To keep you safe," she explained, "to remind you always of this day." Matthew accepted it reverently, placing it over his head. In return, he gave her a silver ring, simple but beautifully crafted, which he had ordered specially from Denver. "To show the world you are my wife," he said, sliding it onto her finger, "and to remind you always of my promise to you." The simplicity and sincerity of the ceremony moved Charlie to tears, which he hastily wiped away when he thought no one was looking. As the morning sun rose fully above the horizon, bathing them in golden light, Matthew and Morning Sky shared their second kiss, deeper this time, a sealing of their union. Later that day, the justice of the peace arrived from the neighboring county to perform the civil ceremony that would make their marriage legal in the eyes of the territory. A few of Matthew's more open-minded business associates attended, along with all the ranch hands, including a stiffly formal Tom. The justice, a practical man with little patience for social prejudices, conducted the ceremony with proper dignity, pronouncing them husband and wife under the laws of Colorado Territory, with no indication that he found anything unusual about the union. A small celebration followed, with food and music, and even dancing in the ranch yard. If some of the guests were uncomfortable with the situation, they kept their opinions to themselves in the face of Matthew's obvious happiness. As night fell and the guests departed, Matthew led Morning Sky to the main house, their house now. He had prepared the master bedroom for her, adding colorful blankets and a rocking chair by the window, attempting to make the space welcoming for his new bride. Morning Sky stood in the doorway, taking in the large room with its unfamiliar furnishings. "So many things," she murmured, running her hand over the carved bedpost. "Too much?" Matthew asked, watching her reaction carefully. She shook her head. "Different, but good different." She turned to him with a small smile. "New life, new ways." Matthew stepped closer, drawing her into his arms. "Some new ways," he agreed, "but we'll make our own traditions together. A life that honors both our pasts while building something new." Their third kiss was different from the first two, deeper, more urgent, a physical expression of the commitment they had made. As Matthew's hands moved tentatively over her body, Morning Sky felt a surge of desire that surprised her with its intensity. Her marriage to Standing Bear had included physical intimacy, but it had been a dutiful thing, primarily focused on the creation of children. This was something else entirely, a wanting that came from her very core, a connection that transcended the physical even as it was expressed through touch and taste and whispered words. They came together as husband and wife with a passion neither had fully anticipated, discovering in each other's arms a depth of feeling that bound them more surely than any ceremony could have done. Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness with Matthew's arm around her, Morning Sky felt a peace she had thought lost to her forever. She was no longer alone, no longer the last remnant of a vanishing people. She was a woman with a future, with a husband, with the possibility of children to carry forward the blended legacy of their unusual union. "What are you thinking?" Matthew asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That perhaps Creator had planned for me after all," she replied. When I thought path had ended, it was only changing direction. Matthew pulled her closer. I'm grateful our paths crossed, morning sky haze. The name sounded strange to her ears, her Comanche name joined with his white man's surname. But there was rightness to it too, a symbol of the bridge they were building between their worlds. As am I, she whispered, resting her head on his chest, letting the steady beat of his heart lull her toward sleep. The first year of their marriage brought both joys and challenges. The most immediate challenge came from the town of Ordway itself, where sentiment against their union occasionally flared into open hostility. Matthew was asked to resign from the town council, and Morning Sky was refused service at several establishments when she attempted to shop there. Matthew took these slights with outward calm, though Morning Sky could see the anger that simmered beneath his controlled exterior. Their loss, he would say with forced lightness. We'll take our business elsewhere. They found allies as well. The general store owner, a practical German immigrant named Mueller, welcomed Morning Sky's custom and even began stocking certain herbs she requested. The local doctor, initially skeptical of her healing practices, grew to respect her knowledge after she successfully treated a case of mountain fever that had confounded his more conventional approaches. Charlie remained their staunchest supporter, defending Morning Sky fiercely when he overheard disparaging remarks in town. Even Tom gradually thawed, especially after Morning Sky saved his prized hunting dog from a rattlesnake bite using a poultice of her own creation. On the ranch, they settled into a comfortable routine. Matthew continued to manage the cattle operation, while Morning Sky expanded her healing work, treating not just the ranch animals and workers but eventually people from neighboring properties as well. Her reputation as a skilled healer spread, bringing an increasing number of visitors seeking help for ailments that conventional medicine had failed to address. Some came furtively, ashamed to be consulting an Indian doctor. Others arrived openly, desperate enough to try anything that might bring relief. Morning Sky treated them all with the same quiet dignity, neither offended by the former nor taking advantage of the latter. Matthew watched her work with undisguised pride. "You've built something important here," he told her one evening as they sat together after a particularly busy day. "People are starting to see you for who you really are." Morning Sky leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in their shared closeness. "They see healer, not Comanche woman," she corrected gently. "Is not same thing." "Maybe not," Matthew acknowledged, "but it's a beginning." Their physical relationship deepened as well, a source of mutual joy and comfort. Morning Sky had worried that she might not be able to give Matthew children, given her childless years with Standing Bear. But as winter turned to spring, she began to suspect that the Creator had other plans. She confirmed her suspicions with her own knowledge before sharing the news with Matthew. One evening in early April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid colors, she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat abdomen. "New life grows here," she said simply, watching his face for his reaction. Matthew's eyes widened, a complex mixture of emotions washing over his features: surprise, joy, and something that looked almost like fear. "A baby," he whispered, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "You're sure?" Morning Sky nodded. "Signs are clear. Child will come when leaves fall." A smile slowly spread across Matthew's face, transforming it with a joy so pure it took her breath away. "A baby," he repeated, this time with wonder. He pulled her into an embrace so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair, "for this gift." The news of Morning Sky's pregnancy spread quickly through the ranch and into town, eliciting a range of reactions from wholehearted congratulations, Charlie, to grudging acknowledgement, Tom, to outright disapproval, much of Ordway. Some of the more vicious gossips speculated openly about what kind of half-breed child would result from such a union. Matthew shielded Morning Sky from the worst of these comments, but she was not naive about the challenges their child would face. "Our child will belong to two worlds," she said one night as they discussed names and hopes for their unborn baby. "Will be difficult path. Our child will have us," Matthew replied firmly, "and we'll make sure they know the best of both traditions. They'll be stronger for it, not weaker." As her pregnancy progressed, Morning Sky continued her healing work, though Matthew insisted she limit herself to less strenuous cases. Her changing body fascinated him, and he took every opportunity to feel the baby's movements, his face alight with wonder each time. "He's going to be strong," he declared after feeling a particularly vigorous kick. "Like his mother. Could be daughter," Morning Sky reminded him with a smile. "Comanche women also strong." "A daughter would be wonderful too," Matthew assured her, his hand lingering on the swell of her abdomen. "As long as she has your eyes." Summer passed in a haze of preparation. Matthew built a cradle with his own hands, carving intricate designs into the wood, a combination of traditional frontier patterns and symbols Morning Sky taught him from her people. Together they prepared a corner of their bedroom for the baby, gathering soft blankets and tiny clothes. As her time grew near, Morning Sky became quieter, more introspective. The impending birth brought bittersweet memories of her own mother, who had died when Morning Sky was just 16, and of the traditions that would have surrounded a birth in the Comanche camp. "There would be singing," she told Matthew one evening as they sat by the fire. "Special songs to welcome new life. Old women would prepare special medicine to ease birthing pains. Father would not be present. Men waited outside until child arrived." "You want me to wait outside?" Matthew asked, willing to honor her traditions despite his desire to be with her. Morning Sky considered this, then shook her head. "Old ways are good, but this is new life we build together. I want you with me, husband." When her labor began on a crisp October day, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Morning Sky faced it with the same quiet strength she brought to all life's challenges. Matthew remained by her side, wiping her brow, supporting her as she walked to ease the pains, and speaking words of encouragement through the long hours. Dr. Wilson had agreed to attend the birth, having developed a respectful relationship with Morning Sky over the months. He arrived as her labor intensified, bringing his medical bag but prepared to follow her lead unless complications arose. "She knows more about bringing life into this world than I do," he admitted to Matthew with surprising humility. "I'm just here as a precaution." Morning Sky labored through the night and into the next morning, drawing on ancient breathing techniques and herbal remedies she had prepared in advance. When the moment finally came, she bore down with determined strength, bringing their child into the world with a triumphant cry that was echoed by the baby's lusty wail. "A son," Dr. Wilson announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Morning Sky's chest. "And a fine, healthy one at that." Morning Sky gazed down at the tiny being they had created, tears flowing freely down her face. The baby had a shock of dark hair and skin a shade lighter than her own. When he blinked up at her, she caught a glimpse of eyes that would likely turn blue like his father's. "He is beautiful," she whispered, touching his perfect fingers with wonder. "He is both of us." Matthew sat beside them on the bed, his own eyes wet with emotion. "What shall we call him? We never did decide." Morning Sky studied their son's face, seeing in it echoes of both their lineages. "In my tradition, name would come from vision or deed, but perhaps," she hesitated, Perhaps he should have named that bridges our worlds as he does. After discussion, they settled on William Lone Wolf Hayes, William after Matthew's father, and Lone Wolf in honor of Morning Sky's father-in-law, the last elder of her band. As news of the birth spread, an unexpected shift began in the community's attitude. The abstract concept of a half-breed child became the reality of a specific baby, little William, with his father's smile and his mother's cheekbones. It was harder to maintain prejudice against a cooing infant than against a theoretical threat to the established order. The first visitors arrived hesitantly, wives of neighboring ranchers, bringing traditional gifts for the new mother and child. They came out of curiosity as much as kindness, but most were disarmed by the ordinary domestic scene they found. A proud father, a tired but radiant mother, and a perfectly normal baby. "He's beautiful, Mrs. Hayes," one woman said, genuine surprise in her voice as she peered at William in his cradle. "He looks just like his daddy around the eyes." "Yes," Morning Sky agreed simply. "He is his father's son." She did not add that he was equally her son, that his Comanche heritage was written in his bones and blood. That would come later, when these hesitant bridges were stronger. As William grew from newborn to infant to toddler, the Hayes Ranch flourished as well. Matthew's cattle business expanded, and Morning Sky's reputation as a healer spread throughout the county. They added a dedicated treatment room to her cabin, where she could see patients and prepare her remedies while keeping William nearby. The boy grew into a handsome child, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's straight black hair and copper skin. He was bilingual from the start, absorbing both English and Comanche, as Morning Sky refused to let her native tongue die with her generation. Matthew supported her efforts, clumsily attempting to learn the language himself so their son would see that both cultures were valued. His pronunciation often made Morning Sky laugh, but his willingness to try touched her deeply. "You honor my people by learning their words," she told him one evening after a particularly challenging language lesson. "They're William's people too," Matthew replied simply. "He should know where he comes from, all of it." As William reached school age, they faced the challenge of his education. The local school in Ordway was technically open to him, but Matthew and Morning Sky were concerned about the treatment he might receive there. "Maybe we should hire a tutor," Matthew suggested, reluctant to expose his son to potential cruelty. Morning Sky considered this but shook her head. "He must learn to walk in white man's world. Better to begin now, with us to guide him, than later alone." They compromised by arranging for William to attend school 3 days a week, with Morning Sky teaching him Comanche ways and history on the other days. His first weeks at school were difficult, with some children repeating the prejudices they had heard at home. But William had inherited his mother's quiet strength and his father's steady confidence. He weathered the initial storm and gradually won acceptance, if not full friendship, from his classmates. One evening, when William was 7, he came home unusually quiet. Morning Sky found him sitting alone on the porch, his face troubled. "What shadows your heart, my son?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Jimmy Miller said I'm not a real person," William confided, his young voice struggling with the concept. "He said I'm a half-breed, not white and not Indian, so I don't belong anywhere." Morning Sky felt the old familiar pain, sharper now because it touched her child. She chose her words carefully. "Jimmy Miller knows little of the world. You are not half of anything, you are whole. You carry 2 traditions, 2 histories. This makes you not less but more." William considered this, his young face serious. "But where do I belong, Mother?" "Here," she said firmly, placing her hand over his heart. "You belong to the land beneath your feet, to the family that loves you, to the future you will create." You are the bridge between worlds, my son. That is not an easy path, but it is an important one. Later, she shared the conversation with Matthew, who was furious at the Miller boy but proud of William's resilience. He's going to face more of that, Matthew acknowledged grimly. We can't protect him from all of it. No, Morning Sky agreed. But we can give him roots deep enough to withstand the wind. As the years passed, their family expanded. When William was 9, Morning Sky gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Morning Star Hayes. 2 years later, another son joined the family, Thomas Bear Walking Hayes, named partly in honor of Old Tom, who had by then become one of William's staunchest defenders and Morning Sky's unexpected friend. Their unusual family became, if not fully accepted, at least an established part of the community. Morning Sky's healing practice continued to grow, bringing people from far beyond Ordway to seek her treatments. Some still came furtively, but many others arrived openly, respectful of her knowledge and skills. Matthew expanded the ranch, adding land and cattle until the Hayes operation was one of the most successful in the county. He was eventually invited back onto the town council, a tacit acknowledgement that prosperity trumped prejudice in the practical world of frontier commerce. Charlie, now a young man in his 20s, remained with the ranch, rising to the position of foreman when Tom retired. He was like an older brother to the Hayes children, teaching William to ride and rope, and making Sarah giggle with his silly faces and stories. One evening, as their 20th wedding anniversary approached, Matthew and Morning Sky sat on the porch of the home they had built together, watching their children play in the yard. William, now 19 and studying to become a doctor, was home from his Eastern college for the summer. He was teaching his younger siblings a game that blended elements of traditional Comanche children's play with standard American tag. "Look at them," Matthew said softly, his hand finding Morning Sky's as it had countless times over the years. "Our legacy." Morning Sky nodded, her heart full as she watched her children, the impossible family she had never dared to dream of, when she stood alone at her father-in-law's grave all those years ago. "When you found me at Creek," she said, turning to face her husband, "I was last one, last of my band. No family, no future." She squeezed his hand. "Now look, 3 children with your eyes and my spirit, land that knows our footsteps, people who come for healing, not with fear but with respect." Matthew leaned over to kiss her gently, the familiar gesture still capable of sending warmth through her after all these years. "And it all started with one quiet proposal," he reminded her. "The best words I ever spoke." Morning Sky smiled, thinking of the long journey from that moment to this one, the struggles and sorrows, the joys and triumphs that had formed their shared life. "And best words I ever answered," she agreed. As the sun set over the land they had tamed together, Matthew and Morning Sky Hayes sat hand in hand, watching their children, the living bridges between two worlds, play beneath the endless Colorado sky. Their laughter, a testament to the family created by one cowboy's quiet proposal to a Comanche widow who had thought herself the last of her kind. In the generations that followed, the Hayes family would become known throughout Colorado for their unique heritage and contributions. William would complete his medical training and return to the area, combining his mother's traditional healing knowledge with Western medicine in a practice that drew patients from across the territory. Sarah would become a teacher, preserving Comanche stories and language through education. Thomas would take over the ranch, expanding it further while maintaining the principles of respect for the land that his mother had taught him. And Morning Sky and Matthew would grow old together, their unusual love story becoming a legend in itself, a tale of two people who had built a bridge across seemingly insurmountable differences, and, in doing so, created not just a family but a legacy that honored both their traditions while forging something entirely new.